It's tempting to fit the resurrection of Jesus into what we already believe, rather than letting it crack open what we believe is possible. Hi, I'm Warren, the rector here at St. Columba's. Glad you could join me for my message of the day. I know people struggle to understand the resurrection of Jesus. And to try and understand it, it's tempting to try and fit it into what we already believe is possible. For example, if instead of the gospel saying that the disciples met the risen Jesus, but imagine if they instead said that after his death, the disciples gathered and they had a renewed sense of Jesus' presence. We would, I think, read that and think, oh, I understand that. That's because it would be consistent with what we already think. A renewed sense of his presence. Not that they met him. It's the meeting of Jesus after his death that doesn't fit what our ordinary experience. And so we try and reduce the resurrection of Jesus down to something that is more digestible with what we already believe. This kind of reductionism, reducing it down to something, the resurrection of Jesus, down to something we already believe, it's very common. So that's one of the options of how to reduce it down, is to say that the disciples had a renewed sense of Jesus' presence. Another option is to just jettison the resurrection completely, to say that it doesn't fit, so therefore let's just cut it out as a kind of fanciful superstition. Stick instead with the Jesus who lived and died on earth. Don't get bogged down with conjecture. Life after death, sure, but stay focused on the Jesus who lived and died. Or another option, it's to make the resurrection of Jesus spiritual, in the sense that a bit of him, not his flesh, not his material reality, but a bit of him, his spirit or his soul or something, went to God. So we cut out all the bits of him rising from the dead and meeting the disciples where they could stick their fingers in his wounds. It'd be more like, the resurrection would become more like a continuation after death. And for many people, this third option can then be joined to the first option. So Jesus' spiritual raising he's then spiritually present to the disciples, and they sense this. Now, I don't share in these options for quite a few reasons, but here's a couple of the reasons why. First of all, I don't find that the resurrection of Jesus really is that much more difficult to believe than God as creator. Both assume that God is greater than us, greater than the world, the cosmos, greater than the system, if you like, that we exist in. God is creator. Of course, God is, as creator, is greater, because God made the system. And that God could bring that system to a conclusion, which is what resurrection is about, which is actually the end of the story. That doesn't seem to me a great leap from God as creator in the first place. The other major reason that I don't like these reductionisms of the resurrection of Jesus is because it appears to me more like a domestication of God. It's where, that rather than letting God crack open what God can do, we're saying what God can do. And it seems also to me it runs parallel to what I said on Easter Day, that Jesus can't be the Messiah because he died. It's sort of like saying, well, Jesus wasn't raised from the dead because God can't do that. I'm not so sure about that. If God is God, as I said before, as creator, for instance, and as redeemer, as the one who raised from Jesus from the dead, it seems to me that God can do what we think God can't. And finally, the idea of the spiritual resurrection, as though the material reality of Jesus is just left behind, seems to me hostile to our material reality, to our createdness. This is linked, I think I have talked about this before, linked to my belief in the sacraments. See, if you think about the sacraments of Holy Communion, we receive bread and wine. We receive bread and wine. We receive God through bread and wine, eating and drinking this bread and wine together, you and I. And we do this in prayer. Well, that's a great affirmation of material reality, of our own material reality, our own fleshiness, our own embodiment together in this world. We can eat and drink. And of the sacraments, the bread and the wine themselves, in their embodiment, the stuff of bread and wine. Well, that God would raise Jesus bodily, physically, if you like, not leaving behind his material reality, of course, because God's at work in our material reality. God, our bodies aren't contrary to God. They're not sort of the enemy. God loves me in totality and intends to save me in my totality. Thanks for joining me. Bye-bye.